Beerdkrag is vereers iets van die verlede. Daar word vordering met ons spoorweë en hawens gemaak en infrastruktuur instandhouding word skynbaar daadwerklik getakel. Daar is diegene wat sê dit is alles te danke aan Operasie Vulindlela, 'n gesamentlike inisiatief van die presidensie en tesourier om staatshervorming te versnel. Vanaand hoor ek wat gedoen is en wat nog beplan word om die land in die regte rigting te stuur. Rudi Dicks is 'n medeleier van Operasie Vulindlela en ook hoof van die projekbestuurskantoor in die presidensie. Rudi, so many of us felt like something, the energy crisis would never come to an end, but now it seemingly has, and we're seeing a lot of progress being made in terms of our rail infrastructure, our ports. How did you do it?
It's a difficult task. I mean, when we started this project, which was Operation Vulindlela, which means simply opening up, or in this instance, not the Brenda Fassie song, right, which is also named after this, but it is about opening the economy or making way for growth in that sense. And when we started off in 2020 as a response to the COVID crisis, it was under the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan. You know, what we said was, what are the key interventions that can grow this economy, can get it out of this low growth trap, Lourensa? And so the focus was on the network sectors. We said we're going to focus on only 5 things: electricity, logistics, including ports and rail, visa reforms, telecommunications, in particular getting out the 4G and 5G spectrum, and water reforms. And that's what we set our task at. And of course, at that onset, when we sort of got out of the lockdowns, the energy crisis got worse, and we formed the National Energy Crisis Committee under the leadership of the President. And this was quite an important part as one of the first projects of Operation Vulindlela, to not only unlock energy reforms, but also deal with the crisis. So it goes hand in hand. So what we did was specifically to ensure that we get better generation capacity, but we also had to reform the electricity market. So some of the stuff that we've done with Eskom, for example, unbundling, or the decision that we took in 2022 to allow for private sector generation investment, which was not an offtake by Eskom, but by private generators, without having to involve Eskom in the state. Those are the fundamental things that have helped us.
Do you think any of this would have been possible without the involvement of the private sector?
When we started out without the private sector, in actual fact. You know, I mean, many of the first reforms were not involving the private sector. One important reform was the spectrum. You know, we were haggling over this, Lourensa, for 10 years. Just to get 4G and 5G out, and we had to take a decision and said, we're going to auction this, right? And we did. We did it with many of the telecos, and we had the 2-day auction, and of course we've raised about 14.2 billion rand. That's besides the point. I mean, what we needed was to get efficiency, reduce the cost, and make it much more effective for us to young people to get access to internet. That's an important employment opportunity. Similarly, when we did with the electricity reforms, it was that. And part of the objective of the president was then to, in 2023, to say, why don't we partner with the private sector? Because the private sector then came and said, look, we sort of align with what you are doing in Operation Vulindlela, but we want to focus on these 4 things, or 3 things initially. They said, we like what you're doing on energy, can we partner on that? We like what you're doing on logistics, can we partner on that? The third area, they said they wanted to look at crime and corruption, and that's quite an important part. The sort of 4th area that we commonly sort of agreed on, that while we do these reforms, which tend to take a bit of time, we've got to look at immediate employment. We can't wait for people to get jobs when the economy grows in 2 or 3 years' time. We've got to do it now. So we focus on that. So the private sector has been such an important part, but ultimately government had to make those decisions, and those policy choices were left with us to do.
But Rudi, do you think that you had to, in a way, reinvent the wheel? Because you talk about these focus areas, and some would argue, but we have departments, we have ministers, we have political heads that are supposed to focus on these things. Why is it necessary for the presidency to have a special project to tackle these challenges?
That's the problem, right? I mean, let's take energy reform, since you asked me the first. We took those policy decisions in 1998, Lourensa. Never implemented it. Tried it during Mbeki presidency. You know, what it did was that, you know, we didn't change the law or create provisions for private sector investments, which meant that Eskom didn't commission additional generation capacity. So what you had was, in 1998, saying that if we don't do this by 2007, you are going to have a crisis in energy supply. We've had that in 2007, and it persisted right up until 2024 when we resolved that. So government departments tend to ensure that much of these issues are supposed to be implemented, but the President felt that we cannot deal with these constraints. These are constraints that cannot go on like this forever, and that we needed to make changes around unbundling of Eskom, unbundling of Transnet, allowing private sector. This is not privatization, by the way. I've got to remind viewers. This is about unbundling so we can allow for competition in those traditional sectors that have always been dominated, even pre-1994, dominated by these incumbents and never having competition. Today we can see competition in the rail space. Today we can see competition in the energy space. So these are going to be important initiatives. And so you've got to take this sort of intervention from the, let's say, the centre of power, right? To be able to ensure and direct it.
Where does that centre of power lie? Because if it's all about state reform and fixing, I mean, you've spoken about this, state capture and how our institutions have been hollowed out. So now it's about fixing those institutions. But then aren't we just going to get to a situation where this institution as a state might be hollowed out again by different people?
Not really, because the thing about Operation Vulindlela is that it's the coordination and the drives from the presidency. The actual implementation is from the department. We can't be doing the work of departments because then people don't own it, Eskom doesn't own it, the departments don't own it, and that's quite fundamental for us. We put this as an important criteria. They've got to drive those reforms. And so I think that's an important part of the way and the dynamic that we've driven this. We have an ability where the president is able to engage with the minister, we are able to engage with the director generals and the different officials in the departments, or even the CEOs. We call it stock taking. Right, where we say, well, you signed up to this. We've agreed on these time frames, and that's why you see in the report, Lourensa, we are quite pedantic about, following those time frames.
The consequence management.
There's a consequence if you don't do that. You get the president calling you and saying, you've agreed to do this. Why have you not agreed to do this? And that's really what we're about. Delivery and ensuring that we do it at speed.
But you've achieved so much, and I think perhaps it's unfair that South Africans expect you to do the impossible. Is it impossible to expect from your team to tackle something like crime and corruption in South Africa? Because given what we've heard, the Madlanga Commission and in Parliament, this is, I think, probably the most pressing question.
It is. I think that people are tired of the fact that government promises stuff and they don't deliver. We are professional bureaucrats or public servants, and we've got to make sure that we do the job. We've got to get into a mode of not sitting back and hoping for the best, right? We've got to get people to work, and we've got to get to professionalize and deliver, irrespective of whether their political party changes. And that's quite nice, because the uniqueness was that we had the OVIN in the 6th administration, we had elections, and now we have a government of national unity, and we continue OV, right? Because everybody's bought into the fact that the reforms are so pertinent for us for that. So it is not unfair of citizens to say, but what are you doing around this? What are you doing around local government, for example? And we've tackled that. It's a huge task. I make no claim that I think it's going to be an easy thing. It's going to be absolutely difficult, given that you have all the legislation that, very different to tackling an Eskom versus the Municipal Finance Management Act or the Municipal Systems Act that are defined all constitutionally for municipal governments, where we've got to sit and work with them and fix basic services. That's the key thing. So I think citizens are right to ask government, why are you so slow? We do move pretty fast, but I think people are tired. People want growth. People want to see that there's an inclusive growth. People want employment. People want to see that the property is protected, that business can operate, we can attract investors. That's what it is. And I think, towards the last few months, I think we've seen all of that culminate. Fat of grey listing, greater confidence of some of the sort of confidence indices. OV coming together quite nicely. G20 over the weekend, right? These are all important, momentous work that creates the kind of confidence, investor sentiment. That's what drives us,
Well, Rudi, congratulations and good luck with the future product.
Thank you, Lourensa.